2/3 of our panel. The other third is on the ferry as we speak, or in the car coming from the ferry, so it should arrive here very quickly. This is brought to you, as you know, by the Cascadia International Women's Film Festival. And this is actually the second year we've had something like this on campus. We had hosted one last year, and it was very successful too. So, without any further ado, the people that are here, okay, we have Dacia Sainez, a filmmaker. We share Austin, Texas in common. She's a founder and executive director, has worked with documentary productions for CNBC, PBS, and the Sundance Foundation. She debuted 3 short films at the 2012, 2013, and 2016 Seattle International Film Festival, and actually works for Adobe, and kind of is both passionate, just talking for a little bit, passionate about what she does for Adobe, as well as passionate for filmmaking. And so, welcome. I'm glad you're here. She made the film, right? Second, we have Amy Benson, who with her husband Scott is the co-owner of the nonfiction media, and Scott's up there? Right there, okay, there he is. Scott Squire, right? A production, maybe you should sit here while we wait for the next guest to come up. Have a full panel, and then you could kind of,
I don't want to have to move.
Tag them on. They're the co-owner of the Nonfiction Media, a production company in Seattle. She has shot and edited over 25 short films. Her very first short about life in a local homeless camp won awards from the Seattle International Film Festival and the Seattle Times. Drawing Tiger, which we'll see later, is her first feature film. So, and the third person, Sandesh Jofi, is the founder and executive director of Fearless 360, a media and virtual reality company in Seattle. As a 2016 Stranger Genius Award winner, Sandy has been recognized as a cultural innovator. And we will be seeing Sweet Crew by her this afternoon. So, welcome to you all. Mary Erickson in the Communication Studies Department is the moderator, and I am now turning it over to you. So, welcome.
All right, well, I have a whole list of questions, and I thought we could kind of chat about some of these questions for a little while, and then maybe open it up to the audience if you guys have questions as well, and when Sandy comes, then we'll move her in as well. So I first wanted to have each of you kind of talk a little bit about your work the panel is called Immersive Reality, New Technologies for Media and Film. But I do want to acknowledge that just because we're looking at VR in some capacity, we're not completely erasing or removing the rest of filmmaking, and Amy fulfills that role more so, going more kind of towards the traditional documentary filmmaking route. But what I would like for you to do is maybe tell us a little bit about your filmmaking that you are working on, and maybe some of your experiences, Dacia, for you in VR, and maybe Amy a little bit more why you're kind of sticking with sort of traditional scope of filmmaking. Why don't we start with Dacia?
Cool. I was going to say let's start with Amy.
Alright.
Yeah, so I have been in filmmaking probably for the last, I was making stop motion animation films when I was a little tiny kid, but they're not that, they weren't super great. But I love cinematography and I love filmmaking, and have been very fortunate to work on bigger productions and then started my own company and got into documentary filmmaking. And really focusing on social justice issues that I was very passionate about. And then I had an experience with my first 360 video, which essentially, the easiest way and more successful way to use it is with Google Cardboard, which is like a $20 thing you can put your phone in, and then you kind of have this 3D world that you can move around in. And it was a really powerful experience. It's super cheesy. It was a YouTube concert or YouTube video. But it was amazing. I opened up, started, and I was on stage in a stadium, empty, and then I hear a voice, and it's Bono, like right there, singing into my soul. And then I hear another sound, and I turn around, and it was The Edge playing guitar, and they're both just like surrounding me with sound. And then suddenly I was transported, and I was in Africa, and people were singing a version of their song, and there was mariachis, and they were doing their version, and there was this like little girl tinkering on a Casio in a room, and it was just a really powerful experience to be transported in 3 minutes to that many different spaces and really feel like I was there. and be curious and observant about what was happening, and I was in tears at the end of it, and I was like, what's this thing? I want to play with this. So I got to meet Sandy, and I was invited to be a part of Seattle International Film Festival's SIFX, which was sort of like a conference within the conference, and they just invited a lot of different kinds of artists to come experience different, like the newly emerging films in this media, and it was really powerful. And I met some people, and they asked me to direct my first 360 film. So I'm doing that right now, and it's a really strange place to be. Like, I think I begin my storytelling typically really visually, and from a direct, like a DP, like I want to know what the shot looks like. You can't really do that in 360 in the same way, because people have the freedom to look wherever they want, and it's more about how you create a space and give people time to acclimate to that space a little bit. So it's a really interesting and different way to think about it. So I'm working on a piece called Experience Pride, where we're sitting with LGBTQ storytellers. The idea is to sort of capture our context and our history of how we have had to fight for rights and create a lineage and honor like people who had it a little bit harder even just 5 years ago, and then even harder 20 years ago. And so the idea is you sit with this person and you hear this story of resiliency, and then I'm working with this really awesome illustrator who's creating a comic book, sort of graphic novel visuals of their story, which begins to animate around you. So you're kind of like immersed inside of a graphic novel. And then all of that transitions, and suddenly you're at Pride. And so we went and filmed 360 footage at Seattle's Pride this last year. So the idea is, like, if you were a kid living in rural Idaho and you don't really have an opportunity to go to Pride, like, here's a way that you could experience like a connection to the larger context of your story, of part of our identity, and then feel like you're a part of community. So yeah, that's where we're at. I filmed the interview with our first storyteller, Karen Schwartz, who's amazing, and came out right when AIDS was beginning to be talked about. And I was like, oh, I want it to be a medium shot. And I totally filmed it. We went through the whole first story, and then we thought about it for a minute, like, oh, she's gonna be disembodied in 360 space. She's just gonna be a torso, because the idea is that we're in space together, right? So it was just like my brain broke a little bit in that moment. It's like, thank God, Lacey, you said something. So then we had to pull it back so we could see her whole frame. So it's just stuff like that that's been really interesting moments of like, oh, right, okay, cool. So yeah, we're learning, experimenting.
That's made me think of a lot of things. So the reason I haven't done VR or 360 yet is just because it's not, I haven't had time. Like, documentary filmmaking is so, takes up a lot of time. But I know it's the thing that's coming. It's coming.
It's here.
It's here.
It's here.
And the reason that we got into documentary filmmaking is I'm really interested in us as humans and the intimacy. I mean, in a way, I would say, like, I'm addicted to the relationship of the filmmaker and subject relationship. And that's what makes me so interested about what that means for 360 and VR and all the things coming down the pipe. But our film, that if you come tonight at 6:30 at the Different Center, Drawing the Tiger, it's the way that we told it is verite-ish documentary where, I mean, not completely, but you would call it fly on the wall filmmaking, where we really just spent time. The film took 7 years to make, and it follows the story of one family in Nepal. And it's what we were trying to achieve with the film is, in a sense, what 360 is trying to do. Like, we were wanting to take the audience to Nepal and to embed them with the family and to see, this is what it's like to live like they do and feel their hardships and get to know them as people, to take away the idea of us and them, and to be able to relate to them and see, like, the biggest compliments, the ones I love the most are when people are like, oh, I really related to Shanta's mom, or I really related to Shanta, or when people say like, oh, that's like my own family. And so we didn't, our technology that we use, we didn't use, we used the camcorder and DSLRs, and, I could talk about the equipment, but it wasn't the technology, it was time. It was just the time of the hanging out, the being there over years, and being in the kitchen for many, many hours, and never turning the camera off, and pointing it in the direction that seemed like it was the right way to point at the time, and sometimes we were right, sometimes we were wrong. And then in the editing process, wading through all that footage, we had over, I blank it out, I think it was 100 and,
250, more or less,
250.
250.
250 hours of footage in a different language. And so the years that it took to go through that and to pick out the scenes, to create the scenes, pick out the scenes that we felt really captured their story to the utmost integrity, and and to create that story arc that's going to bring the audience with you. And was something that was very important to us when we were making the film was the transparency, that we as filmmakers were there. We're white, we don't speak Nepali, we're from a whole different culture, and we wanted in the film to acknowledge that we were there, but we didn't want it to be our story. So I don't know, tonight you'll see like how we tried to make that happen, but that's why I'm interested in 360 in the sense of like, if we were to go back and make this film, which actually we are, we're making a sequel, is the idea that if you could look around and then you see the filmmakers in the corner the whole time, because what are the filmmakers doing now? I'm really interested in what that transparency, how that changes the story and changes how we take in stories. Because the filmmaker is always part of the story, always, whether we see them or not.
Absolutely. Well, that would be really interesting to think about how the filmmakers, or to make the audience remember who the filmmakers are, because so often we forget.
Can we ask questions during this?
Yeah, sure.
Or not? So Amy, say you were to have done this. You mentioned you missed a shot, you missed the imprint. Say you were doing this 360 filming. How many cameras would it be? Would you have cameras on the ceiling? How do you accomplish this space that
See, I
allows
don't even
you?
know. Can you answer that? Because I missed that. This is for that, and I missed that. Yeah, I don't even know.
Yeah, so the rigs, the way that they work is they're a bunch of cameras all pointing out in different directions in a sphere. So you don't have 3 camera setups, you have 1 camera. And that camera is sort of, that position is always the same, so if you can imagine it being like the center, like inside of a beach ball, and then the footage that you're capturing is everything around it. And so the kind of most common rigs right now is you take 10 GoPros and you put them in this thing that you can either 3D print or purchase. It just holds them all. And then it's got a ton of wires, and you can either put it on a microphone stand or hold it on a monopod. It's really, it feels so limiting in some ways. And then there's like all the batteries, and you got all the cards, and you got to start everything. And luckily, you could try to start them all at the same time. And then what ends up happening is you get all of those different shots that are taking, footage of it all, and then it goes through a program where it gets stitched together, and you got to like essentially sew it together. So people are playing with different ways of this. There's some prosumer cameras that are more affordable and have like 2 lenses that are really fisheye, but the quality's not as great.
So in a way, it's kind of like a 3D computer game where the center is where you're supposed to be.
Yeah,
And yet the story unfolds the way you only linearly in your storyline.
not necessarily.
So you could turn your head left or right.
You turn your head wherever you want.
And or you could say, I want to replay that and take a top view of looking down.
You mean in filming it?
Or watching it.
In watching it, no, in a passive experience, so there's a couple of things, like if you're filming it and then you use it on your phone and you're using Google Cardboard, there's no interactiveness, there's no depth, so I can't walk around in a scene the way that I could in a 3D game. I'm in a fixed position, it never changes. In a video game and in interactive experiences, which right now are happening through things like the Oculus and the Vive, you have an ability in motion, there's motion tracking, because you've got these headsets, sensors and controllers and all the things, so you can actually move in space. And so there are stories that are being developed and experiences being developed where you have agency and you can interact with things, right, in all kinds of different ways. Where we're headed, I think, and there's rumors that both Unity, which is a game developing company, software, and Amazon, they're starting a new venture called Lumberyard. And the idea is that you could actually take 360 video, which is passive, and I have no effect. I can only observe, I can't affect. That you could actually run that and sort of create a hybrid with some of the interactive tools from gaming. This is where I get really excited, and create branch narratives. So you could create triggers. So if you, as an audience member, I could say when the person turns their head to the left, I want this plot point to start.
Like choose your own
And
adventure.
yes, and when this person turns their head, I want that. So we're headed in a direction where there is going to be sort of those abilities, and maybe as the director, I don't want you to even realize that you're having those interactions. They're so subtle, or maybe I do intentionally want you to be able to have a very clear idea of how you're affecting the situation. But that's kind of the exciting place of where we're going.
So just to make sure I understand, so like let's say you were in a game, you could walk, maybe go into a room and then suddenly pick up whoever you're talking to.
But in the 360
story.
video, you can't move necessarily, so it would be more about like your motion tracking or maybe local sound triggers. You have to think about it in a little bit different terms, I think, at this moment. There are cameras right now. Lytro is working on a camera that will capture volumetrically, meaning like it's not just the flat plane of 360 spherical video, but all of this. So with all of that information, you could create like essentially a gaming environment.
Well,
But that's
I'd like
we're
to-
not there yet.
I'd like to just jump in because I would like to welcome Sandy now that we've got Sandy here. We had started off, we haven't actually been going for very long, so you haven't missed it. But I did ask Dacia and Amy to just kind of talk a little bit about themselves and their filmmaking, and so I'd like to hear from you as well, to talk a little bit about your current projects you're working on, and especially work that you're doing in VR. How long do each of you take?
Oh, like 10 minutes.
No,
For real. We storytelling.
They were here on this.
Okay, so specifically in the context of the journey from traditional doc filmmaker to VR.
Yeah.
So my name is Sandy Siafi. I've been a filmmaker on and off for 48 years. I started making films when I was about 5, 6. I started shooting in Super 8, and I'm so excited to say I was way on the cutting edge of the vampire movies because I made them with Kool-Aid before, because Dark Shadows was a television show when I was a little kid, that was a big deal, and I was obsessed with it, and I restaged all of it. So my early days were all darkroom related because I went to a very, very, what I would call power Catholic school, and the nuns had a darkroom that they let me play in all the time, and I used to develop my own Super 8. I still miss that. Because recently, as I've been working newly in VR, I was yearning to smell the chemicals and just mix some film. I was so tired one one day I had a technical problem I couldn't solve, and I yearned to hang the film up. So I love film as film, but in college, I went to college in upstate New York at a small college called Colgate University, and it was in the early 80s, and if any of you recall, it was when 4 nuns were killed in El Salvador during some really horrible era in American foreign policy, and I was 18 years old and learning about it for the first time, and I saw a video that had been shot on a 3/4 inch deck camera rig. It was called a U-matic. And it was a torture victim in El Salvador talking about how American foreign policy had impacted her life. And I was 18, and I did have a moment of, I can't unhear that, I can't unsee it, I can't un-anything it. And I was super creased by the sensation of my love of photography. It was immediately clear to me. Like, I love filmmaking, and transporting an audience to a place where this is happening, it will be my work. And I knew, I like literally knew it. And so I became a philosophy and religion major and peace and world order studies specifically, and a filmmaking minor right there and then. And I was also lucky enough, a very weird confluence of circumstances, because Colgate is not where you go to study art or film back then. But they just at the time had started a film program, and there were 2 people working on that, and one of them was a very unknown filmmaker at the time named Jim Jarmusch. At my college. And there were 4 students who signed up for the first film class, one of whom is a filmmaker now named Joe Berlinger, was my classmate at Colgate University. I know, isn't that crazy? So I just happened to land in this incredible place because it was also an extraordinary liberal arts education, and putting all of that together meant for being someone who's devoted to nonfiction storytelling early on without knowing, you know this stuff in reverse. I just didn't know that then. But I would say the way it directly relates, skip ahead, I made lots of work that was narrative. I made a lot of media in the 90s in particular that was about designing media for live performance, because I was very intrigued with the use of media inside space to be immersive and present. And when I think about all the trajectories that made no sense along the way, what I realize now is I was really in many ways hoping and dreaming that the aspect of transporting someone that virtual reality is potentially there to do is really in many ways what I always had hoped to do with my work, that I could bring you there urgently. And in 2012, I saw the work of a woman named Nani de la Peña, and I was once again completely creased and changed. If you don't know her, she is my contemporary in age and was a very big deal and incredible journalist, and her brother was involved in the gaming world. And she started to see and hear and understand using video gaming and the way in which that should intersect more with stories. And she opened something in 2012 at New Frontiers at Sundance titled Hunger in Los Angeles. And it is an experience in which you personally feel as though you're waiting in line for food on a food line, and right in front of you someone passes out and has a seizure from a diabetic coma. And you feel like you have to make choices in there. Should I go over and look at him? What should I do? And back to the point you were just making about computational photography and all of its implications, she uses partial primary sources and adds animation so that you can physically move around the area. So you go from 360 viewing to 360 movement in a whole paradigm shift inside VR. So I saw that work, and I decided to go back to grad school and study the intersection of virtual reality, storytelling, gaming, and human rights. I was at the time trying to work on a human rights documentation camera. I had been in Northern Ireland in 1998, and I craved a proprietary human rights camera so that work could become evidentiary in criminal courts. So with all of that, I saw her work, went back to grad school. I didn't end up finishing that program, but I did know that I would be committed to working in that intersection for as long as possible, and that is what I'm doing now. So I'm working now at the intersection of those things. So that's probably as many minutes as I should take. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm here. I rushed from the ferry, so I couldn't slow down. So, okay, here I am.
Well, that kind of brings me to one of my another question I have several, but I wanted to hear a little more, and you kind of started to address this, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about each of your motivations for working within human rights or social justice issues and translating those to film for the audience.
Amy.
I actually don't consider myself a social justice filmmaker. I mean, that's not true. It's secondary.
It's like one earlier.
It's about, I think that, or I guess, maybe that's not true. It's I believe that I'm not a prescriptive filmmaker. I don't know the answers, and I don't want our work necessarily to give any answers. I feel like with Drawing the Tiger, with our project about this 7-year portrait of this family in Nepal, it's about understanding what we as humans have in common and where we don't, and I feel like sometimes I feel like when I watch social justice films, I don't remember them afterward necessarily. Like if they, but if I feel more like if I watch a film that's it feels like I really know someone. I keep them, and their stories become part of my story, and that's where I see myself then making different choices in the world. So that's what I want our work to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I have a really deep belief in the power of story, and that really when we are able to authentically share our story and hear one another's stories, we finally have an opportunity to sort of bridge gaps in our understandings of one another, and it really can change how we treat each other. And so my approach in storytelling is based on the fact that I feel like people having an opportunity to learn about others' experiences is going to be what begins to create impact and affect their day-to-day thinking, and just create a mode of empathy that didn't exist there before, and that we don't get when we're watching the news or reading facts or getting infographics thrown at us. It's not really about that. It's about ultimately like our human connection and the space and time that we share, and how we have to try to do right by one another as best we can. And I feel like that bond and that currency that helps create that energy and that space is our stories. So, yeah.
Well, I couldn't say it better than both of you did. So I think what I'll do is I'll tell you, I feel really critical of the film that we're showing here today that I made with hundreds of people. I hate that part too. Then every time it says a film by Sandy Siafe, I feel terrible about it. I hate that. I want to go back and review the credits. But I feel that one of the aspects of growth in my own thinking as a writer-teacher, up until very recently I was a professor for many years, and I'm no longer doing that. I'm trying to sort of work in public pedagogy very much right now. But part of what I feel critical about is straight up the neoliberalism. That I spent a lot of my career going to places with cameras that were right in between war and peace. And I had a strong belief that the photojournalist James Nachtwey says that when you insert a camera into a war, you don't go to a war and think you're not on side. The side that you're trying to be on is the side of the humane, which of course is the first casualty of war, is the truth and the humane. And so you're there with the camera to intercept, to literally try to catch bullets in this way that will bring us back to remembering the one child. It's always the one child, which has been recently true relative to Syria. That said, I went to all these places over the years in between war and peace. So I spent a lot of time in Central America. In the trajectory of my life, that means South Africa, Central America, Soviet Union, then becoming Russia. Nigeria, most recently, last year, parts of India. So I've been in these places, Northern Ireland, one of the more interesting, because my job there was actually not to make a film that was going to be anyone's story. My job there was to direct 3 cameras on the Catholic side, 3 on the Protestant side, during the Good Friday peace agreements of 1998. And my job was to be the least interested in framing a story that I had ever been. I was supposed to be the most faithful actor of documentation and turn the tapes over to the committee that would review the future policing. And which was great for me because it got me back to what I worry about and what I'm critical about Sweet Crude. While I made the film, I became a protagonist, which I would not have wanted to do. But I wanted to be honest with my audience about that, and so I chose to narrate. But narrating a film about a civil war in Nigeria is a very heady thing for me to have done. And I did not do it lightly, but I also know that in some of my grant applications I used phrases like, I will give voice to. And I look back and just think, I feel so apologetic for every time I ever claimed I was giving anyone a voice, that I just now find that absurd on my own part. What I should, I think, moving forward, be much clearer about is that I'm aiming to, as an artist, to frame and create a context, an experience in which you can come to your own experience with people, a place, a story, your own reaction to it, to have a much lighter touch, which I think you do as an artist, by the way. I think your very light touch is really gorgeous. And I think I'm such a political beast that I was in all those places. I cannot claim that I was not unabashedly political in all those places. Even if those politics were the politics of peace, it's still a heady thing. And I just also say all that to say there are so many extraordinary people right now filming things about places in between war and peace. And I think they need all of us out there who are peers and elders to do a very good job of making the distinctions between what we're doing when we're using a camera in a dangerous place. We're telling a story of people who asked us to be there and tell that story, whether we're telling it in a manner that is the community that lives there is saying, I want you to help build this tiny capacity, we have the rest covered, thank you very much. You know, and whether or not I belong there. You know, whether or not a better use of me is if there are a young collective there that already has that skill set, they just need me to raise money. You know, so I'm just making a lot of changes in how I intersect filmmaking and social justice work of late. Yeah.
So we were just having this discussion in the car on the way here. Yeah, it's the thing about there's this technology, but there's no technology that takes away the conundrum of the role of the filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Like the filmmaker is that's always the question of like, what am I doing here? How am I affecting this whole story?
Well, and I think like with 360 storytelling and VR, my inclination has been to go in the opposite direction of like traditional like social justice films. I find them problematic often, especially because of how immersive they are. Like, okay, I'm gonna go to Syria to the refugee camps, and now I'm gonna go to brunch and have mimosas, and like, what are we actually doing? Like, in those scenarios? Now, I've also seen films that were documentary that felt different than that. And what felt different about them is that they weren't otherizing, they weren't exploitative. It wasn't like, hey, let's pop in and see this really weird, awful thing that's happening over here, and now we feel better because somehow we did that. But rather focused and centered the narrative on the change makers in those communities. So one of them was about this woman who survived Ebola, and she's like the only person that's ever survived Ebola, and now she spends her time and she goes and she holds people that are sick because she's the only person that can be around them. Now that she is immune forever, for the rest of her life for Ebola, she can actually provide physical contact with people who are hurting. And that was a really different way, I think, to frame a story that took me to a place where there is struggle and conflict. And but I think what's really exciting and fun for me about this new, just to kind of put this back to 360 VR, is that it feels like there's an opportunity to reconnect to a sense of play and a sense of wonder and excitement, and like when you get to, you have to be curious in those spaces, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to remind ourselves and create new worlds and build new worlds, to remind ourselves that this is also a virtual reality. this is a social construct. Like, we've inherited a lot of systems and they weren't always so, and capitalism is only 200 years old, guys. Like, and we act like it's been around forever, and our gender norms, like, all of this is, like, these are not things that are set in stone.
You're going red pill, blue pill.
I mean,
You're bringing the matrix.
but that's what it is, and so I'm hoping that, like, when people are able to go into these spaces and play in different ways and see really weird worlds in different ways, that we're reminded that, like, hey, we can create and shape reality in a lot of different ways, and just kind of pull us out of this water that we forget we're in, because we're in it. And I think that's the most exciting part. And I just want to make videos of, like, I don't know, I want to make 360 VR experiences where you're like petting koalas like all around you, and like kids are all coming up and Care Bear staring at you and like shooting rainbows at you. Like we need to connect to joy again and remember like why. When we talk about social justice, I feel like we get so lost in the fight and the struggle, and because it's hard and it makes you mad, and there's so much that we forget why. You know, ultimately we want to fight for a more just world, and what does that look like? And I'm hoping that this kind of technology can sort of guide us back to our North Star of like why we want to be, like, we're here, y'all, we're all here together, like might as well have a good time, you know? Be nice to each other. Can I add something? That's it.
So I want to add something to that. I could not agree more about the joy part. Oh yeah. The joy in the water. Last weekend, I was lucky enough, there are some artists out of Spain who now have a collective all over the world. They're called the Be Another Lab. And these artists are using Oculus Rift headsets to have two people very viscerally feel the sensation of being in someone else's body. And they're using it, Dacia experienced it last weekend. It's being used in these really extraordinary experiments in gaining more empathy around people with different levels of disabilities, race, gender, class. And we brought it to Seattle for 4 days to try to start a node here of experimenting particularly about race and class in Seattle right now. So we did this last weekend for 4 days, and you know, I had expected that the big takeaway would be this incredibly heavy sense of empathy, etc., all of which is true. But the part I had not thought about at all, but was so taken by surprise about, was the sheer delight of watching every single pair of people who did it were in a great mood when they left. They hugged each other, they were having a great day, and I got all this email about people thinking, I had no idea that virtual reality could be used in a way that actually was more about connecting. Because people just make a sort of assumption, understandably, that it's a very forbidding and isolating and additionally dangerous anti-human technology. As an artist, activist person, I fundamentally disagree with that, but only because I've experienced that it can be used in this way. So it's just back to the joy. And just to say that I have a favorite book of the last 5 years, The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall. And he is looking at the sort of trajectory as a kind of anthropologist, sociologist of story, and saying our assumptions about it have been a little bit too either childish or lighthearted, and we haven't looked at the actually survival role storytelling has played in human evolution. And he's asking the open question, will the new way that we're looking at story lately, which is to say not at all, like I worry that the ways we look at characters in documentaries even, they're so mediated, we've gone so many layers down the rabbit hole of trying to get people's attention that our own tropes are falling apart and we can't grab people anymore. So a lot of social justice documentaries, I'm making fun of myself right now, not the people on stage. It's just like we're yelling at all of you, like, watch this documentary tonight and change everything. Meanwhile, like, please can it be a Sandra Bullock movie? Like, am I really such a bad person if I just want to watch a little Netflix and go to bed? And we're, you know, even those of us making these movies are going home and watching Sandra Bullock.
I need a break, y'all.
So I've done a ton of thinking, like, what happened? I used to do comedy. Like, you know, I need to remember the joy, you know? But it's just to say, I think Jonathan Gottschall's point is, right now, we are in an enormously important time. His concern in the book, his dystopia, is that narrative gives way. If you remember, something called the feelies. And when you go to the movies, there's no story. You just feel what the characters feel. Except for his one, you know, John, who still loves novels. he's asking the open question, will the human evolution moment with story take those feelies and properly integrate them into narratives so that our way of telling stories to one another with old and new technologies will be more embodied, more immersive, more experiential, more respect for the audience in truth. In terms of documentary language, it took us a long time to get where we were. I think documentary language inside 360 is going to help 360 embrace virtual reality experience. This is where I want to go. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, I just the respect for the audience I think is something that we're losing with so much documentary. Documentary is becoming narrative because of the Sandra Bullock problem, and so they're making documentary really what do you call it, they're dumbed down. They're
And also like choo 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 choo, like we're gonna chop it and cut it and edit it just like a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah.
It's fast. I need your attention. We gotta make it really flashy.
And more dangerously cynical like it. Like everything, is so, I can't stand the quickiness. I feel like such an old lady when I say that, but it makes me nuts.
Well, with sound bites, right? Like we need sound bites because we want it to be able to be shared on social media, and that's what's going to create the buzz for it. And so it's like it's not about being present, and it's not about sitting with listening, And that's what I kind of love about 360 Films right now is because people need a minute to just orient themselves. It requires, at least right now, where we are with it. I'm not sure I don't think this will always be true as it becomes more prevalent and then people become more savvy with it. But right now, you kind of need a minute to look around, check it out, and that's like a practice. It's a muscle we haven't really been using a lot in storytelling.
Well, if you think about original documentary from American documentary, the Maisel brothers, if you've seen Salesmen or Grey Gardens, like observation documentary where the Maisel brothers just went in with their cameras and they just shot, right? And it was observing, and we get a lot as people, as humans, from just observing. So I'm seeing this 360 as let's observe.
Yeah, just slow cost down.
Yeah.
Just a minute.
I also think, when you look at the history of early cinematic language and learning how to intercut time and place and really becoming what we call a time-based medium, what happens with 360 nonfiction film is you become a place-based medium. And so you're actually engaged in the early urge to transport someone to a place and then let them have their own experience there. It's why the Viewmaster is a great experience of understanding how stereographic photography engages your emotions. If you look at an old Viewmaster, Mattel just reintroduced the Viewmaster as a VR viewer. And it's one of the cutest and easiest to use. What I love about it is it teaches in Marcia McLuhan was right and will always be right. The medium is the message. And the medium's message, early message of 360 is transportation to another place. It carries less baggage in a way with it. So you can just go there and the filmmaker doesn't have to tell you who the good guys and bad guys are because you're going to be there. You'll sort it out. I think that might be a little bit esoteric of a point, but I experience it as a maker as very real. I'm doing so much less controlling right now in the project that I'm overseeing in 360 than I ever have as either a director or producer of a film before. I'm having far less, this is how I want to see, I gave the cinematographer a sweet crude, I want a ton of close-ups of feet on the ground, everything about what's under these people's feet and what it's doing to them. I don't ever say things like that working in 360. It's just put the camera there.
It's different, right? Because the rule uses where do you point the camera? That's the big choice that we have. And so if you're not doing that, it's a whole different.
No, you have to place it in, here's the other cool part. You have to place it wherever the light and the experience will be the most like being there and in a full landscape. You have to be careful not to have it obscured by anything. Whereas we're always busy looking for the perfect lip, right? I want the beer over shot, right? You would never do that now because your whole shot would be beer. You're like, oh no, at a wedding, I shot a wedding recently, oh my god, the wedding is horribly shot because most of it's a bottle of red wine. You're not learning how to shoot in 360, you know what I mean? It's truly new language.
Well, I talked to another person who's filming a lot right now, and he said he had found that people, you want to put it lower, a little bit shorter, because people feel uncomfortable feeling taller than everyone else. People feel okay being a little bit
Exactly,
lower
yeah.
and looking up, and so that's a really interesting thing, just kind of tapping into our psychology of how we are in space and what feels good.
And the filmmakers who did it so well in the Flatties first. Spike Lee taught us who Radio Raheem was, who died recently, in Do the Right Thing by where he put the camera. But as you said, some of those tropes have been so beaten into the ground, I think they're losing a little bit of their muster. So it's just, I look at it, you know, American painting, some people say, was destroyed by photography and saved by photography, because then it became the modern American painting movement that we know, because it was liberated from being the art form that faithfully recorded what was happening. So if the Flatties are being liberated from all sorts of things right now, what might they become? I mean, it could be
I've never
sorry.
heard that before, I love it.
the 360 filmmakers now called
Yeah.
2018 Flatties. So
It's very like 1920s.
there's friends who I know say not bad for a Flatty. It's like my dad used to say about Dixie Riddle Cup jokes. He'd be like, not bad for a clean one. But just meaning, I think we're going to have truly a film renaissance, because so many people who are poor and outside of the mainstream of media have access to make it than ever before in history, which is a revolution in and of
and
itself.
share it. And edit
Absolutely.
it, all of it.
And we don't even know, it's a flat distribution landscape in some ways. I mean, there's plenty to be nervous about. I could be negative in 1 second if we talk about the AT&T merger, but
Go this way. We're connecting to joy. We're connecting to joy.
But as we see this big disruption of film, and you know, we have hit the end of certain things working, it's going to be terrific to see where we go.
It just also, I just echo this, all of this. I feel like for a long time I felt really stagnant in my creativity in filmmaking. I think it's just, there's just like this language is really established, and like, and pushing boundaries around it, there's like not a lot of room to fail. Like, yeah, sometimes it works, but really people aren't going to be very forgiving if you were trying something new. They're like, no, that's not how you do it. And what's really cool about having this new space to play in is like, it's a great equalizer for everyone. Like, nobody knows what the hell they're doing, and we all want to figure out, like, is it going to work or not? Well, we don't know until we try it. So it's a really nice sort of spirit of, like, we're sandboxing, we're experimenting, we can fail, it's not a big deal because we're going to learn something from it, which begins to, I think, break us free from this idea, like, why are we doing that with all of the rest of our creativity, too? Like, we should constantly be okay with experimenting and playing and trying new things and it be okay. So I think that's been sort of my favorite piece about it, that I find it affecting my traditional filmmaking too, my Flatty filmmaking, which I am still doing. It's an art form, it's a different medium, yeah.
Well, I had like 30 questions and like that all answered all of them. I think you guys just one after another. It's I'm really enjoying how the conversation is flowing and kind of just hitting on all these questions that I have, and I think that we're all really interested in. I did want to turn it slightly because this is a panel put on by the Cascadia International Women's Film Festival. I did want to talk a little bit about your role as women filmmakers or media makers, and how especially you feel you know, perhaps for Sandy and Dacia, how you feel working in VR or in these kind of alternative or innovative technologies kind of opens up spaces for women to work. But then also, you know, how you feel working as a woman filmmaker as well.
Yeah, I was
So I
gonna
don't know if
ask-
that was even a question.
Yeah.
But
I was gonna ask you to, because most of the VR people I know are guys.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, so I'm curious about your experience, and they talk about it differently.
Yeah.
They talk about it differently.
Very different.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm curious about like how you,
Yeah.
well, what are the conversations when you're talking with the guys?
Well, interestingly, I don't know. I've been, I guess, the kind of the landscape that I've seen is that women are really taking a lot of leadership in this emerging field. So a lot of the spaces that I've been in recently, especially around like VR meetup groups and people that I think because of SIFX and people work, like there's a company, Mechanical Dreams, that I'm working with, and there is just a lot of women-centered space, and a lot of prioritization to also center people of color into that space, which is really exciting. And Noni de la Peña, to speak to her again, she's so powerful because she, I heard this interview with her on a podcast, and she said, we've been trying to jam diversity into Hollywood for so long, but it never started out that way. The system was not built to be diverse. It was built to center white male perspectives and gaze and storytelling and decision making. And she said, we have this really incredible opportunity right now to make sure that does not happen with this, but we have to get in there. And she's unabashedly centering, hiring people of color and women as a priority, and I think that there's a big movement towards making sure that this is a chance we get to maybe do it right and not have like, okay, 50 years from now. But it's interesting because they're different worlds. Like the gaming world, the tech world is definitely more male dominant, and like, let's make some haptic gloves so we can, when we shoot things, we feel it, and it's this really, it's interesting times, interesting landscapes, but the cool thing is like they're not the only ones doing it, and that's exciting, and I want to kick it over to the work that you're doing, because you really are helping create that kind of space to invite a lot of people in at the ground floor.
Yeah, first of all, it matters to me deeply, and I've had a lot of women risk so much more than I'll ever know for me to have what I've had, and definitely it's my turn. I'm of an age where I understand what I need to do, and I think that it's a pretty critical time. We can't ignore the landscape that we're in. It's a really rough year on many levels for people in public discourse, and part of that is because of very dangerously vitriolic verbiage that, I've been in places that are leading up to civil war, and you don't throw some of that kind of language around lightly. So I do think it matters to have I'm openly feminist. I like the word. I am a feminist media maker, and I think that means a lot of things. And part of what it means is a round approach to everything, which is part of why I love working in. Right now, I think there's an opportunity to take this fervor for STEM education and just do everything we can to make it STEAM education. If you don't put the art in there, it's not only not going to be helpful to focus on science, technology, engineering, and math without the art. It'll be downright dangerous. We already have the danger because education largely gutted the devotion to the humanities that I was so happily raised with in a poor family because I had an incredible Catholic school education. I mean, the Marianal nuns did an extraordinary job in raising people who were literate and who didn't have to have money to go to school. So I'm just, in my part of the universe, this is what I'm happy about to say about the Pacific Northwest. They say that, Silicon Valley, we all know Silicon Valley's, what we know the flavor of it is, what it's known for. You may not know that Santa Monica and Venice are now called Silicon Beach because most of VR for entertainment is being made there. And lots of money is flowing there, and it has a very muscular boy feel to it. It's first-person shooter, first-person shoot you up with laughs. Yeah. I spent a lot of time down there. It's very difficult for me to keep my head on. I believe that here in Silicon Rainforest, I think we actually do have a fairly unique job right now. I think we have a shot at becoming known for the place that's about technology for good. It is our legacy and our responsibility, and women are largely leading this in the Pacific Northwest, all across the board. And I would say lots more about it, but I don't want to, that's like a 3-hour what's happening and who's doing what and how amazing it is. But I think it's a critical moment. We could go to a place where the canyon of digital and media literacy reasserts itself in a horribly ugly way that renders some people incapable of working in jobs that will ever earn anything. I mean, we had that happen before, and a lot of people worked to close that gap. The gap's still not quite closed, but it's a lot better than it was. Depending on what happens with coming technology right now and the fact that public schools and community colleges largely didn't gear up to teach any of it. They gutted it. If it wasn't a widget program, they cut it. So what's going to happen now? I think there's a lot of people doing what they can, and it's being led by feminists, and that's not a mistake. There's a reason for that. And it's being led by feminists, people of color, and people who have been on the margins. People whose stories haven't been the ones in the front. They might be now. Yeah.
Oh, I can talk about in terms of being from the rainforest. And in Seattle, we have the documentary film scene in Seattle is, I would say, dominated by women. Like, there are amazing female filmmakers in this area. And I think part of this documentary is, it's not like people are like, oh, you're the director. I'm like, well, I'm kind of, we're kind of everything. When you direct a documentary, you are like most people. You do make it with a team, but at the same time, it's your creation. It's a project. It's a big art project, and you pull in your friends and your relatives and everyone that knows you gets involved. But it's your thing. You're creating it, so you're not part of a hierarchy or necessarily a system. You're creating it out of your own stuff, your own desire. And so I just feel like the community in Seattle and amazing men filmmakers as well. I think documentary filmmakers are just in general really fantastic people because they're generally you're not doing it unless you love it. You can't. You cannot. To complete a film, you've got to just have your eye on the prize. So I think documentary filmmakers, male and female, are curious, they're interested, they're interesting. I will say that I had a child, I had a baby while making our film, and that was hard. And I had to leave our son to go to Nepal, and I was in the middle of breastfeeding, and I left him and came back, and he wasn't interested anymore, and like things like that are real. And that's any woman in any career. But there is, when I meet other moms in the same position, whenever I see other female filmmakers who are moms, it's okay, you can do, there's that whole, that guilt thing of like, and I have felt from my son sometimes like, do you love this film more than me? There were times when it was just so intense, and at the end of editing, where, weren't a lot of showers happening for myself, let alone baby. So there was a lot of, there was the Kickstarter campaign where we just let him watch Scooby-Doo episode after Scooby-Doo episode. And in the end, this last year, he got to come to Nepal with us, and I think he feels much more part of the film. But, no, it was definitely, it's that big, and I don't know if there's any answer to that, except just to keep going and keep on. That's right.
Hey, I watched a lot of Scooby-Doo when I was little. I'm alright. Right. A little weird, but it's alright.
Nothing wrong with it. Well, I wanted to see if we have a few minutes left, if audience members have a couple of questions that they would like to ask of the filmmakers or panelists. Burning questions.
Besides that full immersion virtual reality, is anybody doing work in mixed reality? When you can see through the scene, and then is anybody doing that kind of experience? Because when you mentioned the thing about being on the street and being in the line, you could really do that.
Oh, sure. Yes. So what Dasi was referring to earlier is this year my colleagues and I curated and ran a festival concurrent with SIF called SIFX. And it was kind of a look at this whole range of mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, immersive. And extremely briefly, immersive is everything from laying down in the laser dome and having a film play all entirely over you, which we did do, to the Google Cardboard, even though it's mono in some cases, you're looking all around, or you're all the way fully up to virtual reality, which is a simulated world in which you can either just look at things, move, or impact the world. Augmented reality refers to Microsoft HoloLens will be the most well-known of these devices. but it refers to any device that can give you something in between your eyeballs and the regular way that you now see reality. There are added layers. Like if you put a bunch of clear paper with words on them and layered it in front of you, that would be augmented reality. So some of the practical ways that I know projects that are happening right now would be, imagine a future in 5 years where you're wearing what might appear to you to be regular glasses, and a person is speaking to you in Spanish, and your glasses are running a translation as you are talking with them. That might be a real world, and this, what I just said is really happening. That's a real world application of augmented reality. I know a theater director in London who is using augmented reality as the designer of the play. He's working with the director and he's adding characters and elements in augmented reality that his audience will see while they watch the play. Sorry?
I'm sorry, in augmented reality.
Correct. And I know we at CIFX had a couple of augmented reality pieces where people are using either iPads or iPhones to create small augmented reality characters, right, physically in front of you. So that, yes, there are artists who are beginning to work in the intersection of augmented reality and storytelling, but that is lagging further behind for lots of reasons. Dacia may have a different opinion, but I would say because I think Microsoft's made the same mistake again, and they've held their projects so close to the cuff that the people who need to be playing with this, the fact that they haven't had you, for example, as an artist in residence who would have learned in a research lab why you might care very much about the use of augmented reality in your work, you wouldn't even know that yet. I don't understand why they did that. It's not like they don't have any money. Yeah, it's like they're printing it. So
Yes, it's my real question, which is, how do you guys, how do you direct this, kind of like, it's a tech world. I mean,
Tech world is
how do you direct techies to do what you want to make happen?
So they have a big investment right now in wanting this thing to take off and actually be adopted mass consumer population. And they can't do that without content and stories. So their very tech-centered ways aren't going to get their goals met. So there's some incentive there for sure. With augmented reality, I mean, like there's a lot of exciting things that seem like they might be coming one day, like contact lenses that you put in, and that might be, because that's the thing, it would require something between you and the world, right? And there's a company called Magic Lead, which has just been teasing us with the most gorgeous, like, hey, this might be possible, where this person opens their hand and a tiny elephant is sitting in their hand, or, a whole gymnasium of students is watching a whale, humpback whale, what is it called, reaching? Yeah, in the gym, and it looks like it's happening, but they're not showing like what it's going to be. And right now, HoloLens is kind of like, it's not that exciting. I don't find it. I put it on and it just looks like you have like remember those picture-in-picture televisions from like the 90s? It's kind of like it's like just kind of what it feels like, and it's because it's framed. But there are also some cool things happening, like comic book industry. One way that they've been trying to bridge the gap between print and digital is that they started printing to incentivize people to continue buying physical comic books. They've created augmented reality layers to it. So when you're reading your X-Men, you can take your phone and over certain pages, look at it, and suddenly like the artist that drew it will come out and to explain their workflow to you. And you'll have like a blank screen and you'll see that panel being drawn from beginning to end as a way of like, or they'll tell you a little bit about the story, and you get this sort of extra added content that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise without
Are
that.
they making tools for you? Are they making tools so that you can kind of like...
I haven't played in it at all, so I can't really speak to it.
So I want to make sure I include the audience beyond tech for a moment, and sort of by way of answering your question. To add to Dacia's point, one of the things about more basically there are what are called dev kits, developer kits, and there are conferences people go to and they get a chance to see advanced things and play with some beta testing. But to get back to both what you're saying and I think the point, it's disturbing that of all those possible uses of these new tools, the part that is what's old is new again is does it matter? There's a famous Thoreau quote that when he was told, you can send a message from Maine to Texas in 12 seconds, and he said, but what do I have to say? And you know, a lot of the kinds of tools everyone's so excited about, I don't get excited till I hear that there are genuine proposals to take that augmented reality tool and turn it into the Coast Salish people who lived where I'm standing talking to me and telling me a story. Until it's about something, the answer is how you direct tech people is you get them, just like a director of any project, your real job is that everyone working on it fully understands that you all remain curious about why it matters. And you all work in layers of understanding of how you start from what do I want to finish with to where am I now, and learning how to direct every tech person in between so that they understand one another in a lateral and vertical way. But if you're a filmmaker, you already know how to do that, but your real job is to make it matter. So Nani de la Peña, for example, when she wanted the World Economic Forum, after they saw hunger in Los Angeles, commissioned her to make something about Syria. She's a Newsweek journalist. She takes her urge for primary sources. She gets an audio tape of a young woman being interviewed on the street corner of Aleppo. She takes that tape and the footage and she works in a lab to turn it into a piece of animation. You put it on, and when a cluster bomb goes off behind you, you feel like you have to go find this little girl, and you watch person after person do this experience and look for the little girl. But the fact that that high-tech trick created Oculus Rift, which then her 19-year-old intern sold for $2 billion, okay? The reason that $2 billion promise mattered wasn't because of the genius trick of tracking and retinal tracking, etc. It was because the urge to bring you to the corner of Aleppo because it matters is what made that happen, because we still value that. That is my job inside this moment. My job is to bring the past of what we left behind in terms of teaching a basis for storytelling, filmmaking, humanities, somehow figure out how to take that with us into a place where I can transport you to Aleppo. I see that as my current job is as that kind of translator inside that technical world, because the amount of hubris, money, and power 90 miles south of here in that tech world is extraordinary, but I think all of us in our own way are working in an incredible community to try to harness it.
Yeah.
When we need all your help. We need everyone in the Pacific Northwest to understand we have a job right now. It's very big. It really is. I know I might sound dramatic, but it's a very big job. We, technology companies, you know, it's not lost on me that technology companies, while I worked in a documentary about oil companies, became more powerful than oil companies. Whenever you have any commodity that has that much power in the world, more power than many nation states, and Facebook has more power than India. Facebook's telling India what to do when they want to put Wi-Fi over India. So when that's true, and many of those companies are right where I live, and I've been an artist all my life in that field, I think I have a job to do. You know, and it's precisely what you're asking. How do we direct tech people? The same way you've been working to tell stories your whole career.
We have time maybe for one more question if there is anybody else. Yeah.
I asked a question before, so I'm ready to give it up, but what's the new world going to look like 5 or 10 years? Are we going to be going to Pigford and putting on equipment to see this reality? Or are we going to do this in our homes, in closets? I'm just curious where this is going to happen.
All of the above. It's happening on roller coasters right now. Like, you can go ride a roller coaster and have have 3 different experiences. Like, you could be flying like Wonder Woman and Superman in it, and or the next time be a completely different character. I think the technology is going to become more elegant and hopefully less clunky. And I'm hoping that it will be still something that we go do together in a big place, like a theater with a bunch of swivel chairs, so everybody can go around. I think that there will also be a lot of people that are able to use the technology that it might be okay for them to stay home and still figure out ways to connect with others via those spaces, and that will be okay too.
Yeah, I think I agree all of the above. I think a couple of things. I think just like any moment in which these kinds of breaks are happening with technology and story, some paradigms win a bit more than others. If you look back at the early video cameras, Beta and VHS and things like that, those kinds of technology wars aside, I think that if you look at what Europe is doing, in Amsterdam they have what are called trigger theaters, and what that means is everyone could be sitting in these seats, everyone would be wearing equipment, but a controller could make everyone have the same experience at the same time. And so it's still social. And I think what a lot of older people, I include myself, looking at VR are thinking is an old paradigm, and what we're missing is the social part of it. What we're missing is that for young people who have no compunction about the inclusion of a personal robot in a social life, just for a moment to suspend whether or not that frightens you, what I just said, for a lot of young people, it's a contiguous environment to be social with the technology included, which is why I think it's important, if you're someone who's believed in human rights your whole career, you have to be part of the community now that's looking at digital and human rights in those spaces. You have to show up for that level because you need some of the older philosophy majors at that conversation as much as you need young people who don't have any of those barriers, don't have any privacy urges. So I believe it is actually far more social. Older people are worried it's not social. Younger people have no concern about that. So they want us to get that now. And I see nodding. So you want us to get it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
You can add to that if you want. I just saw you nodding. And
Yeah, I just think a lot of times phones are a great way to encourage conversation amongst people, because now smartphones, basically everyone has one, and so we all have access to the same thing, which is great for sort of breaking down that economic barrier of information. And so, yeah, they can definitely be a social environment where everyone can be involved in the conversation.
so, what's your name?
Ellie.
Ellie,
Yeah.
if you're looking for an internship,
Yes, please.
there is an organization called CREA. It's a human rights organization, feminist human rights organization out of India and New York and many other places. And I am working for them I'm going back to Calcutta very soon, and the whole project is about mobile phones. Because what you're saying is that not only is it true, it's the most true for the largest swath of the world that has ever been true before. And so we're going to do entire programs that are about storytelling in mobile. And then to your point, the way in which we're connecting the world now is potentially so quick because of mobile devices, as long as that story drives it. So we're going there to do a whole project. They're going to be shooting in 360 and putting stuff up on YouTube and Facebook live in 360. So there's no difference between supporting that class and a class in Seattle. So yeah, so anyway, I know if you're really interested in that world, I know lots of folks you might want to look up.
Yeah.
And I predict that we'll have flatties and books in the future as well.
Please.
Yeah.
Don't say my books.
Actually, great films. Actually, the history of it is that all the technology, storytelling technologies remain.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get way better, and they find their community again. So it's all good.
Like, albums are back, y'all.
Yeah.
If there's any, albums are, people are freaking out
Flags are
about
gonna
it.
get better.
Yeah,
I think in 5 years we're gonna see better and better ones.
I agree.
And I
Shake
know
it
that
up.
you'll be a part of that.
We're just shaking the Etch-a-Sketch. So we're doing, we just gotta just draft some new stuff. It's time to play, y'all.
Well, with that, I would like to thank our panelists, Dacia, Amy, and Sandy, for taking the time to share their thoughts with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so we have, I think, still some snacks out.